It's time for Famous Friday here on Pop Up Uke, where every week we invite someone well known in the ukulele community to come here and talk to us about the ukulele and play a little bit. And so we're going to welcome now, all the way from the United Kingdom, joining us here at Pop Up Uke, it's Andy Eastwood. Andy, can you hear us here at Pop Up Uke?
Good to see you.
Oh, it's fabulous to see you. We haven't seen you for a couple of years since we saw you in Scotland at the Ukulele Festival of Scotland,
Oh,
which
yeah.
you just wowed everybody like you do everywhere when you travel and play. And Andy, where are you coming to us today from?
I'm coming to you from the north of England, the northwest coast of England, a place called Blackpool. And it's a very important ukulele spot because our most famous uke player of all time lived here, George Formby.
Wow! And you were born and raised in the north west of England, weren't you?
Well, that's right, yeah, in Lancashire. And I moved down south where my parents got work down there, and I grew up in the south, and then I've now moved back to my roots in the north. We're kind of, for those who don't know England so well, we're pretty near Manchester.
hmm And let me just spout off a few facts about Andy that people may not know. Andy has the prestige of being the first student at Oxford University to present their recital degree on ukulele. And you know how long Oxford's been around? Like 1,000 years.
That's true.
Tell us about that, Andy, just for a moment. Tell us what people thought about you doing that.
Sure, well, that was really great because, of course, I was studying the violin. I've got quite a good classical background as a musician. I was studied the violin and the piano, and when it came to the end of my music course at Oxford, I assumed I would do a violin recital, and my tutor said, "Okay, in the final year, okay, what are you going to play for your recital?" And I said, "Well, maybe the César Franck violin sonata." And he said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, hang on, you mean you're not going to play the uke?" And I said, "Well, I assumed it wouldn't be allowed. No one's ever done that before." And he said, "Well, that's a great reason to do it." So they were great like that, encouraged me to do this. I had to write to the examiners because not only was it the first uke recital, it was the first time anyone had done a popular music recital. It was the first time, in fact, that somebody had wanted to sing and play for the recital. So it was quite unusual. But it got a lot of publicity, and because it was so out of the ordinary, it was in the news, it was in the press, it was on the TV news. So there was a lot of hype around it, which made it a real event for me and gave me a lot of publicity just at the time I needed it because I was leaving university, going into the profession. So it was a really great time.
Wow, that's just a fascinating story. And here's one other little tidbit that people may not know about Andy Eastwood. He is a member, and this is prestigious, ladies and gentlemen. This organization has been around for well over 100 years. Andy is a member of the Grand Order of Water Rats.
Yeah, well, that's true. Which is a kind of it's a funny sounding name, and that's because it's set up mainly by comedians. It's a show business uh, charity organisation. So it was founded originally to put on shows to raise money for people in the show business profession who've fallen on times. But actually, the money that's left over goes to a very wide range of good causes, like children's charities, hospitals, and that kind of thing. So it's a really great thing to be involved in.
Right, and there's some prestigious names on that list of former and current members of the Water Rats. And the only disappointment today here is you're not wearing your golden Water Rat pin. That
It's still pinned to my stage suit, which has been in the closet for about 8 months now since the COVID reared its head.
Wow. Yeah, that's too bad about that. But we'll talk about what you're doing online in just a few minutes here. But hey, we've got some real Formby fans here, and to have one of the world's best presenters of that Formby style, could you show us a little something here? Play a little tune for us, Andy?
He was a member as well, by the way.
Oh, the water rats. Go.
Yeah, right, yeah. Okay, here's a favourite Formby song of mine. Now everybody's got some silly pastime of their own. Some like to mix up with a crowd, some like to be alone. It's no one else's business as far as I can see. But every time that I go out, the people stare at me with me little ukulele in me hand. Of course the people just don't understand. Some say, why don't you watch TV, why don't you read a book? But I get much more pleasure when I'm playing with me uke. Of course I take no notice, you can tell. For mother's sound advice will always stand. She said, my boy, do what I say, you'll never go astray if you keep your ukulele in your hand. Yes, son, keep your ukulele in your hand. Keep your ukulele in your hand, oh baby. Keep your ukulele in your
Absolutely fabulous. Andy Eastwood, everybody. Now, Andy, this may be a personal question, and you may not, you can choose not to answer, but how many right hands do you have?
hand. Just the one, like people.
Well, it's moving so fast that it's just unbelievable how fast that's moving. And
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about getting started on that style if folks wanted to pursue the Formby style.
Yeah, it's funny, interesting you say about getting started on it because oddly enough, I came to it by a very strange route in that I used to listen to the George Formby records as a child because my granddad used to play the uke and he got me interested. But I used to listen to those records before I started to play the uke. And as a kid, I would listen to those uke solos and I'd sing along, not only with the words, but when the uke solo came along, I'd sing along, even though I wasn't playing the uke. So I knew what the rhythm was before I ever picked up a uke. So that's quite an unusual way to come to the style. But it seemed to work for me. And I think that's quite an important part. When you do approach this style, when I teach it, actually, I just did a workshop earlier today about Formby style, and I get the students to sing it first, because once it's in your head, if you can sing it, it's in your head, it's halfway to getting it to your fingers. But anyway, to give you just the briefest potted version of what's going on there in that right hand blur, if you think of these songs, the split, it's called the split stroke. Don't ask me why, that's what it's called. And it's made up of eighth notes. Okay, so there's eight of them in a bar. Normally, if you were playing eight eighths in a bar, in a measure of music, you go down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. And that's your eight notes, okay? But if you think about it, downstrokes are stronger than upstrokes, okay? Because you hit with your nail, you've got gravity on your side, and just the way the hand works, it's stronger on the downstrokes. So what we do to get the syncopation in that Formby style is we've got to break away from down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. So if you think about it, normal bog standard strumming like that, the downstrokes would be on 1, 3, 5 and 7, and you go up on 2, 4, 6 and 8. So to get out of that, to break out of that and make some syncopation, you come up with a group of 3 which goes down, up, down, and the minute you then repeat that pattern, suddenly we've now got downstrokes on 1, 3, 4 and 6. Okay, so they're falling where they wouldn't fall before now. Okay, so we've moved the emphasis off the beat, and that's the principle of it. So if you take a measure of music with eighth notes in it, and then you do two groups of three, and then to fill up the measure you've got another two, so you do two groups of three and a group of two, so it goes down up down down up down down up, and suddenly you've got a bar of music with the accents in a different place than they were when you went down up down up down up down up. Okay, so just by switching between groups of three and two, you get a totally different rhythm, and you then add to that by putting the finger on the chord on the beginning of each group and then taking it off. So down up down down up down down up, that becomes, so, oh wow, so now we've got a melodic pattern going on at the same time as the rhythmic one, and it starts to sound really interesting, especially when it goes at speed. And then you can start to mix them up a different way. So instead of having two groups of three and a group of two, you can have the two at the beginning of the measure followed by two groups of three. So then it goes. So suddenly, through a very simple principle of just groups of two and groups of three, you can get the accent on any beat of the bar you want it. And that's the basis, that's the starting point to understand that Formby technique.
Wow, that was a fabulous couple of minute explanation of the style. Congratulations on condensing it down to that.
Yeah.
That was fabulous. And it reminded me of an old joke, and I don't know if you've ever heard this before, but eight eighth notes walk into a bar. Okay, I haven't figured out the punchline yet, but if you figure out a punchline, you let me know also. Uh, One thing on a serious note, I do want to go back to the beginning of what you said. Here at Pop Up Uke, you just reinforced everything that we're about here because we all here at Pop Up Uke consider this our iHead player, and these are the input portals. And everything we do, we want to go in here first and lodge in our iHead library so it can come back out. And humming the melody first or humming a rhythm, anything, getting it into your head first like that is absolutely, it's the best advice I think you can give any beginning musician or any musician.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. And I do another workshop called Make Me Musical, and I spend the whole session trying to get that across. There's a word actually for, we use the word visualize all the time. It's an everyday common word, but the equivalent word for hearing something in your head as opposed to seeing it, the equivalent word is audiate, to audiate. And when I ask a group in a workshop, does anybody know the word for hearing something in your head? No one's even heard the word. Isn't that strange? The word wasn't even invented till the 1970s. That's pretty new for a word. So isn't it odd how little is talked about, on this subject of actually hearing music in your head? It's so important, and yet we don't talk about it enough. Amazing.
This is why we have Famous Friday here at Pop Up Uke is because we love to break things that people haven't heard before and crack into that whole learning thing because a lot of the people that we're dealing with, you and I in workshops and online, are older people getting new to the instrument. And why not, fast track all this and give them the tools like audiating. I'm going to be using that for now on, if you don't mind. I'll use that word every day. So that's fabulous, Andy. One question about your left hand technique. I noticed that most of us will use our index finger as that bar for like a seventh chord, but I noticed that you were using your middle finger a lot for your bar. Any reason for that?
Yeah, interesting thought. Yeah, um, I try to minimize the amount of movement from one chord to the next. So if I'm going C, D7, G7, to me, that finger is so close already, it's nearer than that one. So I do have a principle, if possible, first finger for the first fret, second finger for the second fret, third finger for the third fret. It's not always possible, of course, but it's just a good starting point. And anything that, so if you're going from C to that, why would you go there? It's just an extra bit of movement, and particularly if you're gonna later on play something in a very fast tempo, then you'll be glad that you kept the movement as little as possible. So it's just that principle, really.
Wow, that's another great tip for the people here at Pop Up Uke. I have to ask you as we begin to wrap this up is about your instrument. Now, what Ludwig are you playing there? I know that you have an original Formby ukulele too.
Well, yeah, he did have one like this. This is a 1920s Ludwig, made in Chicago. Back between, they only made them from 1927 to 29, so they're pretty rare. But I wondered if we might talk about Formby, so I do have it here. This is the Gibson that he played on his last ever TV show, and it's a beautiful Gibson UB3, and it's a pretty special thing. In fact, shall I play something on it?
You took the words right out of my mouth.
Well, he finished off that show just 3 months before he died. Strangely enough, he told his life story on a TV show, and he finished the show with his most famous song, "Leaning on a Lamppost," and he played it on this uke. So that might be a good idea. Leaning on a lamppost at the corner of the street, in case a certain little lady comes by. Oh me, oh my, I hope the little lady comes by. I don't know if she'll get away, she doesn't always get away. Anyhow, I know that she'll try. Oh me, oh my, I hope the little lady comes by. There's no other girl I could wait for, but this one I'd break any date for. I won't have to ask what she's late for. She'd never leave me flat, she's not a girl like that. Well, she's absolutely wonderful, and marvellous and beautiful, and anyone can understand why. I'm leaning on a lamppost at the corner of the street, in case a certain little lady passes by. I'm leaning on a lamppost at the corner of the street, in case a certain little lady passes by. There you go.
Oh boy, Andy, you don't know what that did for me. I've got tears of joy in my heart to be sitting here in New Mexico listening to you play on George Formby's Gibson. Um, yeah, it's coming from Blackpool, England. I mean, it's just really, this has been one of the ukulele highlights of my life. I mean, really, that was just, this is where the world has worked correctly. That instrument ended up in the right hands, and we can't thank you enough for coming to Pop Up Uke today and
Thank you.
sharing that with us, Andy.
Thank you very much. A real pleasure. Thank you.
All right, and let's have you again in 2020 because that's not enough, two tunes. So thank you, Andy. To tell us where folks can find you too, website or online lessons before you go.
Yeah, sure, of course. I've got a website, pretty simple, easy to find, andyeastwood.com. Look me up on YouTube because during the lockdown and everything, I've been putting quite a lot more content on there than usual just to keep myself sane. I've been recording some songs, a couple of lessons as well. There's also a video there that tells you how I do Zoom lessons. I've been doing a lot of tuition since the COVID because normally I would be doing gigs 4 or 5 gigs a week, and of course they're all gone. So I've used this time to do some one-on-one tuition. So I do a 30 or 45 minute lesson, and then I send a little video, practice this, practice that kind of video to go out after the lesson. It works really well. Uh, but yeah, check that out. If you want to see what I do besides the old comic songs, do have a look at my downloads. I've got a nice classical album of classical arrangements on the uke, and also I wrote a piece of music for ukulele and string quartet, which is quite unusual, so you may enjoy that. It's called Spacescape. Something a little out of the ordinary that you might find interesting.
And I don't want to freak you out here, Andy, but we do have one of our pop-up uke members, Victoria. She's right across the water over in the Isle of Man, and she says she's watching you right now. She can see Blackpool. So,
Yeah, Isle of Man. I was just talking to a group of kids from the Isle of Man this morning, of music students who wanted to speak to somebody from the profession, you know. So how strange that is. Yeah, it's
oh,
just
it's a
across.
small world. Well, thank you, Andy Eastwood, everybody. Let's give him one more big cyber applause. And thanks for coming to Pop-Up Uke. It was really a joy to have you, Andy.
Thank you very much indeed.
All right, bye-bye.